Hey guys, what's going on? John here from What's Spinning, here tonight to chat about this new Chelsea Wolfe album, The Birth of Violence. Chelsea Wolfe is a California-based singer-songwriter with a serious dark side. She really caught my attention in her early days with albums like The Grime and the Glow and Apocalypsis. While these aren't my favorite of her projects or anything like that, she really won me over with very chilling lyrics and haunting performances. She was a singer-songwriter. She was an indie folk artist at the end of the day, but one that just came off so tortured. But I kind of wanted her to beef up her production a little bit, start working with a cleaner sound, which she did in 2013 and started churning out some serious masterpieces as far as I'm concerned. Pain is Beauty is freaking awesome. This is her biggest album to date. It's just so cleanly produced, it's hulking, and it shows Chelsea embracing this dark sound of hers. It's practically metal at times. It's just so tortured and noisy, and Chelsea constantly sounded like she was in despair. This album, simply put, rules. Then she came out with Abyss, which ended up becoming one of my favorite albums of the year it came out. It's more or less a concept album about sleep paralysis, actually. But once again, it showed her getting heavier, showed her getting darker, bringing in elements of sludge metal here and there. Maybe you haven't guessed it by now, but every time Chelsea shows up with a new album, it seems like she's just getting heavier and heavier. By the time we got to 2017's His Spun, guess what? She was putting out metal music and doing it great. And while, yes, it has slightly lessened on me since it's come out, it's blackened, it is tortured, it is intense, and 16 Psyche is literally one of the best songs that Chelsea has ever written. So, here we are, 2019, new album, The Birth of Violence. Each single leading up to this album, with exception to one, actually gave me the chills. It's kind of safe to say that Chelsea's working with a new sound. Let's talk about it. No, it's quite evident right off the bat that Chelsea's going to her folkier roots. And honestly, that's how she is for most of this album, and I couldn't be happier about it. We have the Mother Road right off the bat. I might be a Chelsea Wolfe superfan, but this track gives me the chills. I love her smoky vocals and the cinematic edge to everything. You're going to hear me say that a lot. This is an oddly cinematic album for her. And it's funny because in her early folkier days, I always kind of sort of wished that she would work with some better production. Here we are, in 2019, she is working with better production. This stuff is great. Some of the imagery here, yeah, it's kind of cliche. It's very simple, but for her, it works. And the strings and the pounding drums in the final moments, my God, this is epic. Birth of Violence, this album's title track, is pretty freaking awesome as well. I love the broken down and bluesy vibes here. It's at moments like this where Chelsea kind of comes off like some mysterious drifter, and honestly, that's a great sound for her. Her vocals on this one just go right through you, and that's only made even more so when it just comes across just how oddly melodic this track is. And in a way, this track does kind of come off like an older kind of storytelling folk track. It's an incredibly dark and tortured one, but the very rusty, dusty sound to this one make it kind of come off like a cover, but actually a really good one. It's truly haunting, and the last minute or so is so whimsical. It takes me back to the days where I always kind of thought that Chelsea was singing from like some dark fantasy novel, and just that's exactly where I've always loved hearing her. And talk about cinematic, it really doesn't get any more cinematic than Be All Things. I once again love just how dusty and old-fashioned this track comes off. And honestly, this may be some of my favorite vocals of her of the bunch. It's just so dreary, so unbelievably pained, I love it. And once again, the imagery here, so simple yet so powerful. Listening to this, I feel like I'm listening to the soundtrack to the most beautiful apocalypse imaginable. And Chelsea's performance in the midst of all this chaos and dreary melodies and haunting vibes is just so sweet and tender. All of this wrapped up with this incredible backing instrumental towards the end, I might tear up a little bit. Preface to a Dream Play, no pun intended, is the dreamiest track here. And honestly, it's a great sound. It's just so chilling, and I don't even know what those backing instrumentals are, but they work wonderfully. And the way that this one builds, so slowly, so suffocating, it's genius. Like, honestly, this could have shown up on her Abyss album and been a real star of the show. And there is just such a sense of finality to this all. This actually would have been a great finale here. It's beautiful and all, but I wouldn't want to be alone with it. Now, there are one or two tracks here that do kind of make me, like, pine for the old days of Chelsea in the direction that she was going. Honestly, American Darkness, leading up to this album, actually, like, really disappointed me. This is by far my least favorite single. Like, it certainly still has a lot of the great elements that this album carries. If you like a lot of the other singles, you may like this track a lot more than me. But for me, this is very safe. This is a little bland. It's still smoky and very mysterious. But for me, it's just a little too light on the ears. It doesn't have that big cinematic backbone that a lot of the rest of the tracks here have. When I'm listening to tracks like this, I'm kind of back in their early days where I was wishing that she'd take more risks. Even from a songwriting stance, this is just weak. And When Anger Turns to Honey is honestly my least favorite track here. This one is eerie, but for a whole lot of different reasons. Like those opening vocals, it's very chilling. But once again, it shows Chelsea going down sort of a more ballad route, which on paper doesn't sound too bad. But again, it doesn't have that cinematic backbone that like the rest of the tracks on this album. And I hate to say it, but it just sticks out like a sore thumb. And Little Grave is a little disappointing for me too, however, I do like some elements of it. Love Chelsea's vocals here, for instance. They're very small, they're very hurt. It honestly makes things pretty damn twisted on this one. But instrumentally, I feel like this track just could have been so much more. And I don't know what she was thinking in the second half as far as production goes, but it honestly makes this one really hard to focus on. All that being said, the rest of this album are just really pleasant surprises from Chelsea Wolfe. Take, for example, my favorite track here, Deranged for Rock and Roll. Yes, this may be the most straightforward and generic almost track here, but it's just so powerful, so sluggish, so massive. Here, Chelsea for a couple of minutes does bring in some heavier instrumentation, which is something we don't get a lot of on this album, but for a few short minutes, you're damn right it's welcome. And yes, this may come off like the best track that's never been used as a true detective theme that you've ever heard, but honestly, for me, this is a seriously fantastic track. Erde, on the other hand, is much more stark, very alarming. It's still a very rootsy, darkened folk tune, that's for sure. Hearing Chelsea much more on her own here is very powerful. And those wailing guitars in the background, my god, are they great at building some tension. Like, it's actually pretty wowing how a lot of this album is just Chelsea by herself with a couple of instrumentals here and there, but she does so much with so little. And her vocals here are absolutely chilling, especially those whispered vocals that pop in behind her. My god, those are effective. And the way that this track just picks up and gets rolling towards the finale, wow. Dark Universe is a freaking gem. I love the sort of throwback, old school singer-songwriter vibes on this one. Yes, it's still bone-chilling and totally gothic and dark and twisted, but there is still a retro element to her performance here that I really love. And the way that this one builds slowly, piles up layer after layer, I think it's genius. Not to mention the mystery of this track. I can't help but get reeled into it. Now, I do have to say, the cosmic synths that roll in the end are a little much. Is this really where we are right now? But everything else works so well that I could write it off. And Highway, as a finale, man, this is awesome. Like, this brings me back to some of her early recordings, but in a good way this time. It's a straight up, nothing fancy folk tune that once again almost sounds like it could have been a cover. And while other times on here I would have kind of thought that this was maybe a little too stripped down, I actually think for a finale this works great. And that twisted mysticism of Chelsea's performance just comes in once again, reigns supreme. This track is amazing. Not to mention those country-inspired harmonies that pop in behind Chelsea in the final moments. Where were they for the rest of the album? That is a great touch. There's also a short interlude after that called The Storm. It's very short, it's very sweet, and I feel like usually I wouldn't have much to say about this. It's more or less a short little ambient piece with some storm effects, but honestly, it ends off the album in a really great spot and ends up really bringing everything full circle. So in a lot of ways, Chelsea really dialed back the clocks on this one. Took things back to her roots, but brought in this big cinematic edge and some better production. And the result is a really, really great, dreary, gothic, folk, southern gothic album. Most of the time, it's honestly like Chelsea is orchestrating. Most of the time, it's like Chelsea's putting together a string of songs that are going to soundtrack the most beautiful end of the world that you could ever imagine. And that's actually like exactly where I want to hear her, honestly. And yes, there are a few tracks on here that I feel like could have maybe used an extra instrumental or two. And there are a couple of tracks here that make me wish that she would have continued down the metal path. But still, great singer-songwriter album, great gothic folk album, whatever you want to call it. I'm feeling a very decent 8 on this album, but let me know what you guys think down below. If you liked the video, be sure to give us a like, give us a subscribe, and let me know down below what you would like for me to chat about in the future. And until next time, have a great day, guys.